Right, everyone. Hello and welcome to today's CPSA Accredited Partner Introduction webinar with Quota International. Please note that you've been placed on mute for the duration of this webinar, and you may ask questions during the Q&A session using the Ask Question function in your GoToWebinar dashboard. This webinar contains interactive polls, so please feel free to answer today's quizzes or questions using the question and answer function. Hosting today's webinar is Earl Robertson. Earl Robertson is president and founder of Quota International. Quota is CPSA's newest accredited partner and is a leading sales training company with a portfolio of products that provide development and skills in sales, sales management, sales software, advanced strategic sales, and leadership. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Earl to start.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're well. Thank you for making the time to be here. Very much appreciated. At Essence today, we're trying to give you an unfair advantage. And the unfair advantage in sales, and you'll hear me say this a few times today, is all things being equal, people buy from people they like. So what we're really trying to accomplish today is to give you that unfair advantage of not only being a professional representative of your products and services, but also being likable. I've got a quick story to tell you. Years ago, I'm an ex-Procter & Gamble Xerox guy. And the division of Xerox I was in was the consulting division, and I was struggling. And I went to my vice president, and I said, could you come out in the field and watch me do some sales calls? He said, sure. So we spent 2 days together. I think we visited about 5 clients. We sat down at the end of the day, and I said, what is it? He said, I've got it. I said, what is it? He says, it's so clear. I said, what is it? He said, your customers don't like you. He said, listen, you know your stuff, you know your products, you know your services, you know when to probe, when to acknowledge, when to do supporting statements. Your skill set is there. But at the end of the day, all things being equal, people buy from people they like. The next part of the question that you may be asking is, can that be taught? Aren't people just naturally likable? And the answer is yes, there are people that are naturally likable, but if you analyze the skill sets they're using, you can actually decipher skills that you can incorporate into your own style and methodology. And towards that end, I have a request of you, and that is I'd like you to get a pen and paper, because over the course of today, we're going to have some interactive exercises, and I'll be asking you to do some of the exercises, and the very first one happens right now. By the way, we've got about an hour to complete this agenda, but right now, I'd like you to write down your goal for the webinar. What would you like to leave with today? One of the things we know, by the way, is people that write down their goals are much more likely to achieve them. All right, let's keep moving. Lots of material to cover. The first thing is I'm going to give you a 20-second commercial on my company. Quota was created about 15 years ago. It came out of the start of gamification. You may say, what's gamification? And essentially, one of the things we've recognized is that the highest way to learn material and to retain the material is through a methodology called gamification, which is make learning fun. So we started with a single product 15 years ago. We were very fortunate in our first year. We did business with Heinz and Waste Management and Samsung and major blue chip companies. But then quickly those companies said to us, well, what about this? What about that? And so we've been on a 15-year process of product development. And as you can see from this chart, we have programs that go anywhere from core training right through to advanced training. And in fact, we've created our own CRM. The second thing that we did is we worked on international expansion. So our company is now in 20 different countries. We offer our programs in 6 different languages. And if you'd like to learn more about us, quotagame.com, feel free to go on our website and we'll take it from there. There you go. Commercial's over. Let's keep rolling. One of the questions people always ask is how does sales process fit with these types of skills? And the reality is if you think of any activity, most of that activity can be broken down into discernible parts. If any of you are athletes, for instance, if you play hockey or play soccer, what makes someone a great player isn't just that they're a good skater or a good stick handler, it's that they also know how to body check or read the play. In other words, there's different skill sets And as a professional salesperson, you always want to be introspective in terms of saying, where am I strong? Where can I improve? If you look at the chart on the right-hand side of the page, we're looking at 4 broad categories there: face-to-face selling skills, strategic selling, key account or territory management, and relationship building. When you look at the chart on the left, whatever your sales process is, and I'm sure each of you has a unique sales process for your company, within every stage of your sales process, that's where the charisma or the likability skills take place. It's how well you're connecting with your customer and whether or not your customer wants to do business with you moving forward. As we say at the bottom of the screen, it's better to sweat in the training room than bleed in the street. This is one of those experiences when you go through Quota training with us. We have a lot of fun in the classroom, but we also want to stretch you. And so that's the place to do it, with friends and colleagues. Now, the Quota Charisma program itself is quite complex. If you look at all of the content that gets covered over the course of either a day or 2 days, depending on the implementation, there's a lot of material here. Obviously, we don't have time to do that in 1 hour. I picked out some of the key elements that I thought you could quickly capitalize and learn and do with your business. What I will draw your attention to on this page, though, is the 4 phases. You'll see we have an excitement phase, which is when you first meet someone, the personal connection phase where you connect with them, the business connection phase where they see you as a professional business representative of your company, and then the closing phase, obviously, which is typically in a B2B process, we call that process continued. You're closing the customer to the next key event of the sales process. What we're going to cover today are some of those subsets. In the excitement phase, we're looking at how you introduce yourself and how you project to a prospective customer your value system. The personal connection phase, I'll be sharing a skill with you that's very effective called onioning. When we look at the attitudes that are involved in that, you'll hear about flame, ghost, and free. And we're going to do a little work on storytelling. Storytelling is rapidly becoming the new age of professional sales. It isn't just about knowing your products and services, but it's also about connecting with the customer on a higher level. At the end of this, we'll do a recap, feedback. I'd like to hear from you what your final takeaways are, and Rupalin from the CPSA will set up that we can do an interactive screen and answer questions. Any issues, by the way, at any point in time, feel free to just type it in as I'm delivering. I'll get a chance to see some of your comments or questions, and I'll weave them into the presentation. Okay, let's keep rolling. Now we're going to look at, what traditional selling teaches. If any of you have been through sales training, this will all be very familiar to you. Traditional sales training teaches features, benefits, needs identification selling, takes a look at your sales process, obviously communication skills, and then outcome or strategic selling, plus things like key account management, time and territory management. However, the one thing that these courses don't typically teach is how to be liked by your customer. All things being equal, people buy from people they like. So let's take a look at that. And the first thing is, I'd like you to answer a couple questions. If you can just jot them down on your notepad. And the first question is, what does charisma mean to you? When someone says charisma, how do you describe it? And then the second part of that question is, what do you believe are the top 5 ways charismatic salespeople are more valued by customers? Write down. If a customer likes you, how do you think that impacts your business? Two more questions for you. Who would be the most charismatic person you've met? I met Pierre Elliott Trudeau once, our former prime minister. I actually met him twice. And wow, that guy had charisma. Then the next question is, what was it about them that made them that way? How did they engage you in a way that you felt, wow, this person's really special? Whatever your political beliefs are, one of the people I've always wanted to meet was Bill Clinton. And one of the reasons I would like to meet Bill Clinton is, for decades, people have said when they meet Bill Clinton, they feel like they're the only person in the room. He has this remarkable ability to zone in on the person he's speaking with, to the extent that they feel like the whole world has been shut out. What a skill that is. What a tremendous skill for all of us as professional salespeople. Now, going back to the earlier part of this question, how do you think charismatic salespeople see greater benefits? Here's some concepts for you. Sorry, my clicker is giving me some issues. We have seen salespeople that are considered charismatic or likable by their customers have higher hit rates, better margins, shorter sales cycles. You can read. However, the last one is really important. They get the last call option. If any of you have ever lost business to a competitor, somewhere in that process, your customer made a decision between you and someone else. You always want to be the one that the customer calls up and says, listen, can you do anything with this offer? Otherwise, I have to give it to the competition. That last call option happens when a customer likes you. The next question is, how do you differentiate yourself? It's like this kid in front of the pop coolers. Which one? Well, your customers meet many sales reps every week. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what's differentiating you? How do you stand out? Take a minute, if you could, and jot down what you think makes you unique that stands out. Let's look at the 4 phases again. If you recall, we looked at the excitement phase when you first meet someone, the personal connection phase, the business connection phase, the closing phase. We call these the 4 stages of charisma. We're going to be looking at a skill set within each of them. And obviously, we start with the excitement phase. When you take a look at the entire program, you can see how complex it is in terms of all the different skill sets that are within each of these phases. And each of these are phases that need to be practiced. When you look at the excitement phase in particular, this is usually only in the first 1 to 5 minutes. Typically, the percent you're talking may range from 30% to 70%. When we talk about styles later, we'll be talking about how it's important to be flame here. Flame is a positive energy, upbeat, and free, which is you're open to ideas, you're open to the direction the conversation may go. Always be confident at the excitement phase. If you're not confident in the initial 3 to 5 minutes, then chances are very good that you're not going to have a good sales meeting. So when we greet the customer, we have openers. What are openers? Well, you're going to observe what's going on in your client's office, and then you'll be sharing some information with them. Observations have to fall into a number of categories. You have to be original, positive, exciting, engaging, spontaneous, and funny. I put a caveat on the funny. Until you know your customer's level of humor, be cautious. But nonetheless, you can see how if a customer meets with you and they walk away with some of these initial impressions of you, it's going to do very well for you moving forward. We get into small talk and big talk. Small talk is the introduction piece. Big talk is when we get down to business. I had a customer once. Most of my customers, I'll tell you, small talk is typically 2 to 3 minutes. They talk about the weather. They talk about the local sports team. Then we get down to business. I had a customer once, one of our national airlines, and the small talk went on 45 minutes. And I was a young, impatient guy. And I said to my client, can we get to business? And my client looked at me and said, this is business. I realized right there I'd lost the client. For that customer, small talk was really a question of did they like me, did they trust me, and I didn't have the patience for them. I've learned since then, customers dictate the length of time for small talk. Big talk is when we get into business, and that's more in the business connection phase. So let's take a look at some of the elements that are involved that we mentioned earlier in small talk, how to stand out, how to be different than other people that you're speaking with. And that brings us to an exercise. Imagine you're meeting a client on an initial meeting. You notice that they have family photos on their wall. They're soccer players. Maybe the person is even a soccer coach. I'd like you to take a minute and write down what your opening would be that contains all of these 6 opener elements. What could you say that immediately engages the customer? While you're doing that, I'll tell you another story. I had one of my reps talking with a client who had a cement office. It was very high-tech and modern. There was nothing in the office that had any personal relationship to the client. There were no photos, no plaques, except for 2 photos of a yellow Corvette Stingray on the wall. And my rep was dying on the vine. Every question the rep asked, the customer would say yes, no, maybe. But when you're the coach, you get to see things that the person in the middle of it doesn't see. And when there was a lull in the conversation, I said to the client, gee, that's a beautiful car. Well, the client didn't stop talking for 20 minutes. I realized many of us have photos of family. He had photos of his car. It was his car that mattered to him. So whenever you walk into a client's office, one of the things you want to do immediately is do an analysis. What do you see? Is there anything on the desk, on the walls, photos, things that allow you to start that personal connection with the client? If you've done that exercise, and I'll be curious to see what you've done, so don't be shy to throw them out in the question pieces, then let's talk about what values are. There's something we call high values, and what we mean by high values is the impression that you're leaving with the customer that really connects them to you. First is be kind. Second is be polite, be compassionate, adapt expectations. I ran a sales management course last week, and I had a young guy in the course, no offense, he was about 32, 33, and he said, after all your years in business, what single piece of advice can you give me? And I think he was surprised by my answer, but my answer was, be nice to people. And I think he was expecting some more in-depth reason, but I explained to him that I have learned over the course of my career, which is 35 plus years in business. Nice guys finish first. I'd like you to take that to heart. Nice guys finish first. When you treat people with respect and dignity, and you trip, and you will trip, there's no way you go through a business career without tripping. People will reach down, pick you up, and brush you off. But if you're not kind to people, if you're not nice to people, and you trip, you'll find no one is reaching down to help you out. Take that to heart. Let's keep moving. There's another element when we meet customers, and that is, do we have social proof? Who are we? Which company are we representing? How did they learn about us? How were we introduced to them? Having run workshops all over the world, literally, I can tell you that the single most common concern that's shared with me by salespeople is that customers just do not answer their phones anymore. And it's a true statement. If you look at how many unsolicited contacts per day our customers are reaching, they have learned that answering the phone or replying to that email can potentially mean that they haven't done their job by the end of the day. They've become very adept at the delete button. Now we know there's a couple places where we get past delete. The first and most important is referrals. And that is if a colleague says, I've met with this person, they've got something of value, you should meet with them, then more often than not, you'll have that meeting. And also how to use social media. We're not getting into that today, but for the course of the discussion, let's recognize that social proof is what gets you through the door. Then you have a greeting, introduction, and you do small talk. When we look at what makes you attractive to someone, and when I use that word attractive or charismatic or likable, what we mean is someone is happy when they see you, they look forward to seeing you, they feel a little sadness when you leave. So I'd like you to take a minute and think about people that you immediately liked, and then ask yourself, what were their traits that did that for you? Was it their eye contact? Was it their handshake? Was it their warmth? And how do you define warmth? What were the traits of that person that made them likable to you? Okay, let's keep rolling. I mentioned to you that Quota International believes in gamification. And gamification for us is a whole variety of programs. You saw we've got over 15 programs. Every program has a different methodology, gamification methodology to it. But we're going to introduce one right now, which is the pop quiz. So I know you've been sitting there passively listening, but I'm about to ask you questions. Let's see how many of you get 5 out of 5. Question number 1. What's the first phase? Question number 2. What are the 4 elements of this phase? Question number 3. Tell me if I'm moving too fast. Number 4. And question number 5. All things being equal. All right, let's keep rolling. I'm just taking a note at the comments. Anyone gets 5 out of 5, let us know, please, through the questions, and we'll give you a shout out. So we've been through the excitement phase. Now we move to the personal connection phase. And again, you can see there's a lot of elements in personal connection. I should say. 2 things that I want to speak with you about. One is the first, onioning, and the other is the last, storytelling. The personal connection phase, by the way, typically 5 to 60 minutes, typically. Now, everything is relative to the industry you're in. I've been in industries that have a 1 or 2 meeting sales cycle. I did business with Bombardier once in Quebec, the RJ division, the regional jet division. Well, they would have a needs analysis phase that included woodworkers, cabinet makers, aviation designers, structural engineers. It was a really complex process. So in those situations, you've got a long sales cycle with many people involved. Personal connection, percent of talking is typically 50-50. One of the things we frequently say, 2 ears, 1 mouth. Always try and be listening twice as much as you're talking, or you're not learning. Less flame. You don't want to overwhelm the client at this point with energy, but you have to be wide open to any ideas they have and have them share with you the issues that they're facing. What you're really trying to do here is dig deep to the core. Dig deep to the core of the onion means building a personal connection with that client. Onioning. There's 4 elements to onioning. And when we talk about an onion, imagine you're cooking at home and you're putting an onion into your bouillabaisse, and there are layers to the onion. And the more you peel those layers, the more you get to the core of the onion. And people are very much the same. We all have the professional persona that we project when we meet with people, but then we have personalities and lives and any number of different issues within that. So sharing something personal with the client begins that initiation. Sorry, I was a little late today. I had to drop my wife or my kids off at daycare. Now, the client can ignore that, or the client can say, oh, how old are your kids? Now we start to peel the onion. Oh, my kids are 2 and 4. How old are your kids? Mine are 3 and 5. Oh, what a great age. Now we're going back and forth and peeling the onion with each other. So essentially, we share from the surface. If the customer is responsive, then we move deeper, and we keep going as long as the customer is. So it's one of those elements where as long as the customer is meeting your pace and sharing personal information, keep going. Element number 4 is absolutely critical, which is when the customer stops, you've got to stop too. You can't keep digging on that personal level if the customer at that point said, okay, that's enough of sharing my personal information for you. Let the customer set the pace. When we look at the layers of the onion, it isn't necessarily about something uniquely personal to you. It may have to do with clients' preferences, habits, opinions, what they care about, what their goals are, their fears, their beliefs. There are any number of different places that a customer may be comfortable sharing with you. And I'd like you to be as free as possible without precondition to let the conversation go where it goes. Just the very fact that the customer is opening up with you is a really important element of the onioning process. Take a minute. Look at these 8 layers and ask yourself, which are the 3 that you feel very comfortable talking about? And I'm going to give you a minute. I'd like you to do a simple opening sentence for each. How would you potentially introduce this to a customer? Customer says, you're like a water or coffee. Say, man, it's my 3rd coffee today, but I think I'm just hooked on this stuff. And then let the conversation continue on. All right, let's keep rolling. What is the likable attitude? What's the attitude you have that makes you likable? I think we can all agree that if you met someone that was highly defensive, it makes it hard to build a connection with them. I had a client once, I was sitting there with my rep, and same issue was happening. The client was really defensive, really monosyllabic. And there was a break in the conversation. I was able to jump in, and I said to the customer, I get the impression you're uncomfortable sharing information with us. And he said, yes. I said, please tell me why. He said, I don't know what you're going to do with the information. I said, okay, thank you. So what you're saying is you're concerned that if you share information with us, it might be used against you competitively or otherwise. He said, absolutely. I pulled out a non-disclosure agreement. I said, you should know this is common with all our customers. It's not an issue at all. Here's the non-disclosure agreement. We've already pre-signed it. This is giving you assurance that whatever we talk about will stay confidential. Anyway, the conversation ended. We left. He got better. Wasn't perfect, but he got better. And as we walked to the door, I turned to him and I said, so how long have you been with this company? He said, 4 months. I said, oh, and where were you before that? He said, well, I was in the South African Security Services for 25 years. You know, he didn't trust a rock. But the reality is it was very hard to build a connection with someone that has this extremely high level of distrust. So what we say is just the opposite. Be open. Be friendly. Let the information come your way. Styles. We're not talking about sales process now. We're not talking about your sales skills. What we're talking about is the style or the approach you take depending on the customer. So you're going to hear about flame, ghost, and free. By the way, I've been doing this for over 3 decades. And one of the things I've recognized working with clients, and I've done more in-field sales calls than I think probably anyone in the country. And that is, there are people that are doing things subconsciously effectively. In other words, over the course of time, they've learned how to do something, they do it well, but they can't actually label it. They can't tell you what it is they did, they just know it's what they've learned to do. Well, we've also learned that when you can label some of the skills you have, you become even more effective at using them. You also become effective at coaching others in those same skill sets. So I've got a quick question for you. The question is, what is training? Take a few seconds and ask yourself, if someone said, describe training to me, how would you describe it? And here's my answer. Training is condensed experience. If you do any job for 30 years, you're going to be effective at it. However, why do you want the person following you in that job to take 30 more years to be effective? Why not take all that experience from the first person, analyze it, research it, condense it, put it into a methodology that you can teach to the next person, and now they're that much more effective 3 to 5 years into the job than they would have been if you waited 30 years for them. Training is condensed experience. So is this. So when we take a look at these different elements, the first one, the flame, is really about a strong positive energy. When you meet someone, if you have a lackadaisical handshake, if you don't have good eye contact, your shoulders are slumped, you're very quiet when you talk, you're projecting the wrong type of energy to a customer. They want to see that they're working with someone who's professional, excited, passionate about what they're doing. Positive, you initiate conversation, and you believe in what you're representing. The next style we call ghost. And ghost is really where you stay calm in the face of adversity. There isn't anyone that's been in sales for any period of time that hasn't had a client where the dog barked at them and the wife bit them in the morning, or the husband. So they come into work and they already have this aggression built up in them, and you're the poor soul that knocks on their door or greets them first time in the meeting. It's really important in those elements. Don't have any reaction to negative impulses. Stay calm. Stay collected. Let it dissipate. Just recognize the aggression coming at you, and that if you're really going to be likable, it's not because you're aggressive back, but in fact, it's just the opposite. Just be the duck that the water bounces off of. The third element we call free. And free is really a terrific approach, because it means that you're not going in so focused on your own agenda that you're not hearing the customer. You want to go in there totally unattached. Listen to what the customer has to say, share an opinion where necessary, provoke where necessary, but do it in a positive way, because all you're trying to do here is get the customer talking. You know, I've had reps say to me, "Oh, gee, you know, it was a terrible customer experience." And I say, "Why?" And they say, "Well, you know, the customer was sharing their discontent with me." I think those customers are wonderful. At least they're sharing their discontent with you. The worst customer is the one that doesn't tell you. They're sitting there unhappy, not liking what you've said. You leave, and you've never heard where you missed the boat. Customers that tell you they're not happy with something, you should like run around the desk and give them a hug and say, "Thank you for letting me know how you feel about what we've been talking about." Whatever the customer's style is, we have to calibrate. Calibrate means now we're saying, okay, if we understand flame, ghost, and free, then we have to say, where and when do I use these different styles? And my question for you is, when you look at those three styles, which are the ones that feel most natural for you? And which are the ones that you say to yourself, I've got to work on that. That's not something that comes naturally to me. Take a minute and think about that, please. I had a rep who was eventually my sales director reporting to me, and she was just amazing on the phone. I think to date, she's sold about $12 million just over the phone. And I'd listen in on her, and I learned from her. And one of the things I recognize is she would never challenge a customer. She was always very capable at listening, provoking, tweaking in a certain direction, but the customer always felt like they were listened to, they were respected. And it hit the point. We did a survey. We had about 3,000 customers. We did a survey, and she wasn't even on the survey as one of the questions. And I had about 50 customers come back telling us how much they loved her. Well, I was one of the owners of the business, so you can imagine I took that feedback very seriously in terms of how important it is to have that type of style with the customer. She really had a combination of flame, ghost, and free. Whatever skill set you do, it takes practice. In other words, you try something, didn't work as well as you'd like, you correct it, try it again, didn't work as well as you like. Here's my question for you. What can you do to develop a better style in one of these three styles? Ask yourself what steps you could go to improve those skill sets. I'm taking a quick peek at the questions. One of the questions is, would participants receive a copy of this presentation for reference? Rupelin, I believe it's being recorded, but I'll let you address that at the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking, Bonnie. This webinar will be recorded and will be sent over to all of our attendees about tomorrow.
Wow, isn't that great? Let's keep rolling. Now that we recognize how to adjust our style to a client, now we have to ask ourselves, what's the impression we're leaving when we leave that customer? And obviously it's around high values. How do we want that customer to feel about us? Here's 8 specific high values. In other words, when they speak with you, do they feel that you've got sound product and industry knowledge? Are you someone they can trust? Are you empathetic? Are you creative? By the way, I just read an article this morning how many of the business schools around North America are trying to add in creativity training to their BCom and MBA programs, because businesses are recognizing what a unique advantage it is to hire people who have creativity. Are you passionate about what you do? Will you speak truth to power? Are you a caring person? In other words, you're caring as much about your customer as you do about your own company. And self-deprecating is really important. I had a terrific business mentor at one point, Dr. Pierre Brunet. He was one of my profs. and I used to bring him in to work with my leadership teams. And I was away at a retreat in Banff. We had 50 or 60 of my managers there. And he said, or I said to him, I said, what can I do to be more effective as a leader? And he said, make fun of yourself. I said, ooh, that really makes me uncomfortable. He said, I suggest you do a skit next management meeting, and it's okay. Make fun of yourself. So I'm dating myself, but there used to be a talk show host called Johnny Carson. He did a little skit called Karnak the Magnificent. So I went to a costume store in Toronto. I got one of the big Karnak hats, and I did the skit. I have to tell you, I was shocked at how so many people were comfortable coming over and speaking with me. Just by opening up my kimono a little and showing some humanity and some self-deprecating humor, people were much more comfortable approaching me and sharing things with me. Something for you to consider when you're looking at building relationships with people. Values are unique, and my question for you is, what are the values that you prize most? When you look at this list of 8, what are the ones that when a customer or a friend or a family member shows these values, what are the ones that you say, wow, this really connects with me? Years ago, I was in Japan. I used to live there for a short period, and I went to Kyoto. Kyoto is the ancient capital of Japan. There was a fountain in one of the temples, and it had a sign that said, drink the water and pick any 2. And it said, if you drink the water, you'll get rich or healthy or wise. It said, pick any 2. I know right now you're asking yourself, which 2 would I pick? Well, it's the same thing with high values. If you had to pick high values, which ones would you pick that really resonate with you? The other thing with high values is saying you have a high value doesn't connect. Demonstrating the high value is what connects. So always ask yourself, when I leave an interaction with the customer, what values do I want the customer to say, I really like that person, and here's why. Pop quiz, you ready? Get your pen out. Here we go. Question number 1. Question number 2. However you describe this. Number 3. Have you got these down now? Can you write out the 4 phases? Number 4. Finally, question number 5. Good stuff. Like I said, anyone gets 5 out of 5, let us know through the question piece. We'll give you a shout out. Right, let's keep rolling. Lots more to cover. So we started with the excitement phase. We went to the personal connection phase. Now we're going down to the business connection phase. Again, it's relative to your business. It's relative to the complexity of your product or service. But at this point, there are certain things we can do to help us connect even closer to the customer. And the first is storytelling. We say this was the original form of communication and entertainment. I know that's hard to understand in the days of YouTube and personal mobile devices. But it used to be the best way to learn and to teach was through storytelling. Excuse me. Storytelling typically identifies an issue, it shows how the issue was addressed, and it also provides the reward. Here was the problem, here was the solution, here's the consequence. Let's look at storytelling in terms of creating a visual picture. And this is really important. And I have to tell you, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of reps over the course of my career, and there were some that just had that unique ability to tell you a story about an everyday issue. For those of you that ever watched David Letterman, I often refer to him as someone that the most mundane thing could have happened to him during the day, and then he'll tell a story that just keeps you stuck to everything he's saying. If you think of your favorite story, I think you'll ask yourself a couple other questions. First is, who told it to me? Did you trust them? Because in the very act of storytelling, your receptivity is often generated by, is this someone that I trust? And it builds, again, a closer bond between the two of you. Stories need to stimulate emotions. I have a son who's a musician, and he was working with a production manager from Los Angeles who talks a lot about moments. He said what an artist tries to create on stage is a moment, because the translation of having that moment with the audience is the audience wants to feel that moment again, so they go out and buy the artist's music and buy the artist's merchandise. Well, in your case, are you stimulating emotions? Are you having a moment with the customer? Are you demonstrating your high values? Is it memorable? And in many cases, storytelling preempts questions. In other words, the story itself actually preempts the customer asking questions because the story has identified the solution. The neat thing about stories, they can be about anything, anywhere, anytime. And they can be just a sentence. This has been attributed to Ernest Hemingway, the great writer. But someone said to him once, what's the shortest story you can write? And he came up with 6 words. For sale, baby shoes, comma, never worn. Wow. Doesn't that just capture you like, oh, what happened? Why did the baby never wear the shoes? What's going on? 6 words. He was able to provide a fascinating story. It's not about length. When you have stories, it's important to build stories in your own personal library. Personal stories, company stories, parallel stories, which is providing to the customer a story that illustrates a point, and product stories. You may even want to write these down. You may even at some point say, okay, what are the personal stories I'm willing to share? What are the company stories, and so on? So that, like any other entertainer, when the situation arises, you're already prepared with your story. A good story has structure. So let's look at structure. The first thing is every story has a hero. It's not necessarily you, but there is a hero. It also has a challenge. There's some obstacle the hero has to accomplish versus. And at the end of that, there's a reward. I just want to reiterate those 3 for a minute. There's a hero, there's a challenge, and there's a reward. Next time you're writing down a story, I'd like you to think of those 3 subdivisions in terms of how you're articulating this story for your client. Finally, a good story has style. It's done in such a way that it grabs the person's attention. I don't know if any of you are fans of the Graham Norton show. Graham Norton is a United Kingdom entertainer. He has a late night talk show. And at the end of each show, he has something called the Big Red Chair, where people from the audience sit down and they tell a story to this couch filled with celebrities. And Graham has an ejection lever. So if you tell a story that isn't interesting to them, he pulls the lever and you're ejected from the chair. Well, there are some people that start the story badly. In other words, well, many years ago, well, ejected. There's other people that start a story with, so I was being chased by a grizzly bear. And then immediately the couch of celebrities sits up and, oh my God, what's this story all about? In other words, there's a style to it that grabs someone's attention. Any story has to involve the audience. It has to create a moment, should have some humor or self-deprecation. And I think really important is holograms. Holograms means you're painting a word picture. The person can actually imagine that you were there. And again, not too long. Purpose of a story is that you can capture the client's attention, but not go on to the point that they're saying, my God, I need to get out of here. I haven't got time. I had a rep I interviewed one day. He came in, and in the middle of the interview, I said to him, tell me a story. And he said, okay. He said, I woke up this morning, and it was early, and I didn't want to wake up my wife. So I kept the lights off, and I got changed in my closet. And I said, okay. And he said, so I came in and I've been doing this interview with you. And I said, right. And he said, you may not have noticed, but I've had one hand, I've crossed my legs and I've had one hand over one of my shoes the entire time. And I looked down and I realized he had one black shoe and one brown shoe. And he'd spent the whole interview trying to cover the fact that when he put the shoes on in the closet, he hadn't turned on the light and he didn't see what colors they were. It was a great story. I hired the guy. He turned into one of our best reps. When you're doing stories and you evaluate them, I'd like you to reflect on a number of things. What resonated for you in the story? Did you feel involved in the story and why? Did you experience any moments or emotions? Are any observations you can make about structure? Remember the structure again: hero, challenge, reward, and style. And did you actually see yourself being there? Finally, time to create your own personal story. Again, this is a webinar. We don't have the opportunity to do what I'd like to do, which is be in an interactive process with you where we could hear them and dissect them and so on. But for your own edification, ask yourself at the end of this webinar, what's the story that I can tell today that I can make part of my repertoire? And always make sure it demonstrates your high values. By the way, don't make the story about your products, services, or core activities right now. Make it about yourself. Make it as something that you can do a personal connection with someone. I'll give you a very quick example. If I was in a client's office and I saw they had pictures of their kids, I'm a family person, love my kids. I remember at one point I was talking with a client and I said, look, I'm sorry, I'm a little tired today, but my son was quite sick last night and he threw up on my bedspread 3 times. And my client looked at me and said, 3 times? I said, I know, it was terrible. He threw up. We washed him, we washed the bedspread and sat him down, and then boom, happened again. Well, any client that has a young child will relate to that story right away. They'll also relate to me. They'll see that I'm a person just like them. I have the same type of issues they deal with on a human level, and it makes that connection with their client that much closer. Something else to consider. Storytelling is the new question. Great salespeople ask great questions. Elite salespeople ask unbiased questions. But charismatic salespeople use parallel storytelling to engage their customers. Think about that for a moment. Going in, understanding your client's business so well, and knowing where you can use storytelling to connect with that customer is a really important skill set. Parallel storytelling, as we said earlier, just think about the issue a client may be facing and then come up with a parallel story that helps them understand how your product or service will help them deal with their particular issues. When we look at things like product stories, by the way, and I'll give you an example, most of us at some point have bought a car. So imagine you're in buying a car, and one car has a 3-year, 60,000 kilometer bumper-to-bumper warranty, and the other one has a 5-year, 100,000 kilometer bumper-to-bumper warranty. Well, one of the ways you can illustrate with the customers, you can say, how many kilometers a year do you drive? Customer says, I don't know, I drive about 20,000 kilometers a year. Well, can you imagine if you did that and then after 3 years, your car starts to break down? Wouldn't you be better served having a warranty that would protect you for much longer than that? We had a customer that went through that very situation, and share with them some details of that. It's how you use a story to get your point across. Are you ready for pop quiz? Here we go. True or false? Your story must be about a business. A good story has what 3 elements? What are the 4 steps to proper onioning? We're going back to onioning again. How do we use that skill to build a better connection with our clients? What are the 3 attractive attitudes? Of the 3 attractive attitudes, which one stays calm in the face of a challenge? And finally, which is the one that's most responsive to the client's environment? Okay, you're doing great. You know, I taught at the University of Toronto for many years, and when you have a class of 30 students, you know that every 45 minutes you better have an activity that gets them up and moving, because our human attention span doesn't go much longer than 45 minutes. But we're almost there, so I'm not going to have you get up and do some push-ups. Let's keep rolling. The business connection phase, percent talking 30 to 40%. We want the customer talking much more than us. We've got medium flame, strong ghost. We want to be able to stay calm in the face of adversity. And we continued onion with the client. The final phase, the closing phase, 1 to 5 minutes. 1 to 5 minutes, our share of voice is much stronger, sometimes talking up to 80%, thanking the customer for their time, the opportunity, showing appreciation, staying very free in terms of whatever comes your way, be simple and straightforward. That's your 1-hour introduction to what is often a 16-hour program. I hope you have some takeaways. A quick recap. We talked about the importance of high values, using onioning to build a relationship with the customer, the power of storytelling. We also talked about the different styles you can take with the customer, to blend with them, to mesh with them, to have them feel like they're respected and well listened to. I'm going to turn it over to Rupalin in just a minute, but congratulations. You're able to stay part of the process for the entire hour. Congratulations, much appreciated. I'm really looking forward to your feedback and your questions. I hope this was a good experience for you. Oh, by the way, we are running these programs May 30th and October 3rd, so if any of you are interested in going through a one-day version of this program, we'd be more than happy to have you join us. All you have to do is reach out to my email, earl@quotagame.com, or go on our website, quotagame.com. Rupalin, take it away.
So much, Earl. That was fantastic. We do have a few minutes to take any questions from the audience today. So Q&A session is now open. Please feel free to enter any of your questions through the question function in your dashboard. We do have a couple in there. Earl, which is the most relatable way to connect? Flame, ghost, or free, and why?
You know, everyone is different. So I can't tell you one because it's all relative to the customer. You'll have some customers that are very aggressive, and if you use a flame with a very aggressive customer, you're not connecting with them, you're turning them off. So it isn't so much about which style is most effective, it's about which is the best style to use with the type of personality I'm dealing with.
So next one is, what high value is most important for charismatic salespeople?
Trust, integrity. You know, again, I've been in business for many years. I've been president of 3 different companies. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that personal integrity is a huge, huge issue. And it's an issue in the sense that when you have personal integrity, people go out of their way to introduce you to other people, introduce you to other clients. And when you don't have personal integrity, that will follow you like a bad smell. So, being a person of your word has repercussions far beyond where you might even imagine. Within my group of business people, we have a simple saying, which is, are they one of us? So anytime we're introducing someone into our group of business people, we just ask, are they one of us? And what we mean by that, are they people of their word? Are they people that you could leave your wallet in their hands? Are they people that you shake their hand, you don't have to count your fingers? And if they're one of us, come on in. But if they're not, we're not interested in having them join our circle.
Mm-hmm. One last one here. Can you give us another example of how storytelling has benefited one of your customer relationships?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and this is a part of my evolution. That as a younger, very driven salesperson and sales manager, I never felt I had time to build a close connection with the customer. Too much to do. And as I've matured, I've ended up in a situation where, because of my own stubbornness to be open to this, I recognized that there were customers I really liked and respected, and I just wasn't building a strong enough relationship with them. So the storytelling aspect of that is just being comfortable sharing personal information with the client. And through a whole variety of ways, I have many of these clients that are now close personal friends. In fact, if you ask me were they a client, I'd probably say to you they're a friend before they're a client. So being able to open up and share with people and not be concerned too much about your image and be concerned more about just having that positive interconnection with someone, storytelling is the way to go.
And I think we have room for one more, just touching on a point that you'd made during the presentation. Aside from the example of offering a non-compete, do you have other tactics for disarming defensive clients?
Well, you have to address it. You know, when you've got a customer that is clearly being defensive, you can't ignore it. You're better off addressing it. And if you're like my business, we do business with any number of different companies, including competitors. Our job is to work with any customer that wants to utilize our programs and services to grow their business. And so there are times that you'll have customers be very defensive, either because they're concerned about are you doing business with a competitor, which by the way is a bear trap, and or what are you going to do with the information. I talk about the bear trap question, which is a customer saying to you, are you doing business with my competitor? And in many cases, if you said yes, that's the end of the relationship. I have learned to say to a customer, we are doing extensive work in your industry. We understand your industry issues. We understand how to help you be more successful. If the customer keeps pushing me, then I'll say, look, I'm not at liberty to tell anyone who we do business with, just like we wouldn't tell anyone we're doing business with you. But if this is really important to you, I'm happy to go back to others and ask for their permission to share with you. And what I'm really doing is I'm saying to the customer, I'm sorry, you can't push me past my integrity bar. I will respect the confidentiality of other customers just like I'll respect your confidentiality.
Thank you so much, Earl. I think that's all we have time for in terms of questions. But if you have any other questions about this webinar, please feel free to email us at salessuccess@cpsa.com. And on behalf of the CPSA, of course, I'd like to thank you, Earl, for being our host from Quota International today, and of course for our audience for attending. Just a quick note for those of you asking, if you'd like a recording of the webinar, it will be available in the CPSA Learning Hub for our members. And for those of you who have attended today, a recording will be sent out after this webinar. So thank you so much, Earl. And to our audience today, I hope you all have a fantastic day.
I have a final thing to say to everyone.
Of course.
Sell, baby, sell. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, Earl. Have a good one.
Bye now.
Bye, everyone.